Drivers who pick up hitchhikers, have you ever seriously regretted picking someone up? What happened? It's December 2009. I'm about to deploy, and I have to drive my car across the country to drop it off at my brother's to look after. I picked up a guy somewhere on I-90, not sure where. The states kind of blend together when you have to drive over 1k miles a day. He smelled like old wet laundry, but he didn't try to talk, which made it bearable. I drove for a few hours and dropped him off at a truck stop he requested. Right along the highway, so it's whatever. I lose maybe 10 minutes total. Then I bought some gas and snacks and got back on the road. I had a full tank and continued driving non-stop, passing lane the whole way, until I was almost out and had to stop for more fuel. As I enter this gas station, I see a familiar figure in this food court area and can't believe my eyes. It's him. It's the hitchhiker. He looked over his shoulder at me and smiled like he knew what was going through my mind, and then went back to eating without saying a word. I was freaked out for days. Not only was the coincidence uncanny, but how the frick did he beat me there? He snuck into your car and hid in the backseat while you were getting gas. I gave a 50-ish-year-old man a ride down the road to a post office. I saw him thumbing while I was pulling out CVS and I had nothing else going on. Anyways, about 3 minutes into the ride he changed the radio station to some oldies music station and then lit up a cigarette and got ash all over the dashboard. He did however thank me when we got to the post office and offered me a few bucks for gas. 2 steps back, 3 steps forward. Rude yet thoughtful. Strange dichotomy. I was driving from Georgia to Tennessee and saw a friendly looking guy dressed like an old hippie walking down the side of the road. I pulled over and offered him a ride. He said no thanks. His place was just down the road. God bless you for asking. Naturally, I was feeling pretty pleased with myself, so I pulled over for the next guy just a minute further down the road. Same old hippie look, but his thumb out. I rolled down my window and he leaned in and cursed everyone who'd passed him and damned the whole state and said he'd blow every mother in it sky high, and then ran to get his bags from the woods. He stood at the edge of the woods and waved his arms around at them in what I can only imagine was a pantomime of him blowing them up in a hellish firestorm. After he threw his bags in my trunk, he climbed in and proceeded to tell me that he was God, that his dong was enormous, that he could control me with his mind, that he had a huge rifle in his small backpack, that every sucker in that state was evil and they all knew him and he could blow every freaking one of them up with a single thought if he wanted to, that everybody wanted to see his dong, that my dong wasn't as big as his, that I wanted to see his dong, that the government was trying to murder him, that he was making me exist, all peppered with fricking suckers etc, alternating between fast talking and outright yelling at me. I'm God. I'm fricking God. You got that? How you frick, I said, do you fricking got that? I was half convinced he would kill me or whip out his massive dong right there beside me. I stopped at a McDonald's, ostensibly for food, but in truth to drop him off. He went inside and berated the clerk for being fat. I told him he couldn't travel with me anymore and took his bags out of my trunk, and he cursed me to heck forever as I pulled away, and I never picked up a hitchhiker again. One time I picked up a guy who looked much rougher up close than I expected, but I gave him a ride anyway. A few miles down the road, he turned to me and said, "Hey, this worked out okay. I needed a ride, and you needed someone who wasn't going to murder you." And that's the story of the last time I picked up a hitchhiker. What's funny is that hitchhikers are probably just as much, if not more, at risk of having something regrettable happen to them. I've been picked up by some crazies. My family lived in Africa for several years and everyone hitchhikes there. We had a pickup truck, so would often pull over and people would pile in until there wasn't any room left. Then you'd drive on your way and people would hit the cab roof to tell you where to stop. If we were driving anywhere, you can pretty much bet we had someone in the back. Once we were driving someplace during the rainy season. It wasn't raining right then, but there were huge puddles all over the road. We were young kids, so my dad started driving through puddles really fast to make a huge spray and we'd all get excited and cheer. After about 10 minutes of splashing, we get a bang on the roof, and my dad was like, crap. We had someone in the back he'd completely forgotten. Poor guy was drenched. Had to apologize profusely. Man, I have such a perfect picture in my head of this. Picked up a couple who were hiking the Appalachian Trail and headed into town. I was not prepared for how bad they smelled. They were super nice though. That's the only time I ever hitched, doing the trail. And yeah, we have no idea what we smell like because you and the funk are one at that point. About 10 years ago, I was hitchhiking from one town to the next and got picked up by an older gentleman. Everything was going fine and we were having a normal conversation when suddenly he says, "Put your head out the window." Now, I looked at him in disbelief as he was rolling it down for me from his door electric. Obviously, he said, "I'm serious now." So I did what he asked and put my face about halfway out. Suddenly, I was greeted by the nastiest fart smell I'd ever witnessed in my life from the inside of the car. It turns out he'd vented his colostomy bag while we were driving because it was inflated. I wasn't aware that happened, but we continued on the drive and continued our conversation as if nothing had happened, and he dropped me off. Nice guy either way, and thanks for looking out for me. Anonymous elderly ride giver. I'm dying. I am trying to imagine his tone as he gave you the instruction. Always wanted to. Did once after my brother's bachelor party in the middle of nowhere, North Pennsylvania. The guy seemed fairly normal, was on his way home from work, kept bragging about his awesome weed he had, even showed me, let me touch it and smell it. Bastard never offered. My brother and I picked up two guys years ago, 15-minute ride to town. My brother rolls up a big Cheech and Chong joint and proceeds to get them blasted. Ask them where they want off. They say court offices as they are going to see their probation officer. We just laughed and said good luck with that. Don't see many hitchhikers around here anymore. Southern Ontario. And the ones I do see are crack W, so like a big nope. Ah yes, the good old crack W who'll do anything. Literally anything. Not a hitchhiker but a guy from work. I offered him a lift down the road and he got in my car and put his feet on the dash. Sucker, you should have bumped into another car and set off the airbags just to teach him a lesson. We got picked up whilst hitchhiking and the guy had about 20 cat skulls sitting along his dashboard. They were his cats, his family's cats and roadkill cats. It was pretty weird, but he was so lovely and we made it to our destination. Bubbles darkest timeline. TLDR. Surprise prostitute. I had just moved to the city from the middle of nowhere and didn't quite know my way around yet. I had just ended my work day around 2 AM. It was raining and cold. I did not know my way and ended up turning the wrong direction toward a not so nice area. I saw this girl, in a bright pink dress and heels, walking down the street, occasionally turning around to look at the cars driving by. I had never seen a prostitute before. I had no idea how to tell. To me, she looked like a younger girl who had the misfortune of walking home from a club in the rain. At first I passed her, then pulled a U-turn at the next light and pulled up beside her. That's when reality set in. I go to roll down my window, and seemingly blinded by the rain, was met not by a young girl, but man bear pig in a pink mini. I sort of stuttered and asked if she was okay, to which she responded, $10 will get you anything. I politely said no, and asked if she wanted a jacket or umbrella. I gave her both, told her to stay safe and sped away. I haven't tried to pick up people in the city since. You're a good egg. I regretted picking someone up once. I've picked up a few hitchhikers before, usually without any sort of issues, and most of them were actually quite pleasant. I don't have any stories of me being murdered or kidnapped or raped or anything dramatic or exciting like that with hitchhikers, but one time this drunk guy vomited, pee and bled all over my back seat. That was a weird day. Picked up a homeless guy once. Well, I was having a bad day and tried to give him a bottle of water. He just unlocked my door and got in. I was ready for an adventure, so I embraced it. I was like, "So where we going?" He gave me some directions. During the drive, he saw me kinda fidgeting a bit. He said, "Are you afraid?" The reason I was fidgeting was to grab the gun under my seat, so I pulled out and said, "No." "Are you?" Then we proceeded to the address. He asked me if I had ever smoked crack. I told him no. He said it was great. Got to the address. Whomever didn't answer when he called, so he tried to get me to take him to another address to buy crack. I was like, "No, man, sorry. I can only do one free crack cruise." Then he got mad at me, lol. That was it. Quite an interesting time. Granddad used to pick up hitchhikers all the time. He was a traveling salesman selling matey bubble bath to shops. One he picked up gave him the creeps. Stopped off at a police station and asked the officers to give him a chat. Turned out to have escaped custody that night. Nan didn't let him pick anyone else up after that. It all turned out okay, but when I was 16 or 17, I'm a guy, if it matters to this story, my friend and I were coming home one afternoon, and a couple of slightly older, mid-20s let's say, dudes were thumbing a ride right across the street from a smallish private university near our home. I decided to give them a lift, even though it would only be about a mile or two until we would be at our destination. We ask them where they are going, and they tell us they, true story I swear, snuck out of the mental facility, Our Lady of Peace, and were going up to the liquor store for some beer. At first, we were kind of freaked out and hoped we weren't about to become a statistic. Then we got the great idea to ask these guys to buy us a 6-pack too, which they did. After the transaction was made, we offered to drive them back, but they said they had other plans, so off we went with some cold ones for our trouble. I sure hope those, if it means anything, they could have just been drug addicts. I was a mental health worker at a mental hospital and they had a detox unit. Most of those PPL were pretty normal for the most part, besides being irritable. When I lived in Steamboat back in the 80s, I'd hitch or drive down to Boulder for the weekend once or twice a month for a couple years to go see my now wife of 24 years. I had a lifted Jeep CJ5 with no top or doors, which is why I'd hitch during the winter. One full day I picked up a guy outside of town because he was standing where I'd always stand. Anyway, he looked like your typical Jesus hippie from '69. Guy never said a word, wouldn't tell me where he was going, and you literally could see the creepy vibes emanate from him. After 2 minutes I decided to give him the ride of his life. Remember, I'm in a big Jeep, no doors, no top with a powerful V8, so I floored it over Rabbit Ears Pass. His eyes were the size of saucers the whole way, so once we reached Kremling and slowed down he said, "Let me off this," and he went his way. Another story was my roommate and I were coming home on a Sunday in the Jeep and we picked up someone outside of Silverthorne going up to Steamboat. It was getting dark when my alternator went out, so I was only running on battery. We hit Kremling again and pulled over to debate what to do. We decided to go for it, so we hopped on HWY40 and drove all the way to Steamboat with no headlights. Fortunately there was a full moon and the car in front of us realized what was going on, so we tailed them the whole way. Swear to God, once we came down and passed the welcome to Steamboat sign, the battery gave out. Hitcher laughed his butt off thanking us for the experience. Good times. It was Christmas Eve and I was working night shifts at the time, so it wasn't uncommon for me to be up and driving around at 3 AM. Stopped at a 7-Eleven and as I was leaving a guy knocked on my window begging for a ride home. It was snowing and starting to get worse outside, so I understood but was a little apprehensive. I hesitated but said sure, and he immediately flagged another guy down and I started to regret it. By this point the first guy is already in my car while the second one is running and I'm just panicking inside. I think the guy could tell I was scared because he laughed and said, "Ha, don't worry, we won't murder you." And I nervously joked back, "Yeah, that's what a murderer would say." They didn't murder me, obviously, and turns out after talking for a bit I found out they were distantly related to me. What made me regret the whole trip was that I got in a minor car accident that probably wouldn't have happened had I just drove the 10 blocks home. Very anticlimactic story, haha. I gave a hitchhiker a lift once. My Cider was out and feeding our reindeers and we were just finishing up for the day when my cousin came riding with a German skier on the back seat of his snowmobile towing a gear sled, like the ones Polar Explorers use. He had found that German skiing on the lake, but bad weather meant progress was slow and he was behind schedule. So my cousin picked up this tourist since he was going in the same direction. When I met up with my cousin and this guy, I talked to him a little bit and we loaded up his ski sled in my car and I gave him a lift about 50 kilometers so he caught up with his planning. He was fuming with sweat and hadn't showered for a couple of days, so he smelled quite bad, but I think he realized that, so he closed his jacket and I wasn't bothered by it anymore. Real nice guy too. He lives somewhere outside of Ravensburg and had just gone through with a divorce. I guess the vacation was to take his mind off of it. He was middle-aged and worked with troubled youngsters and he told me a few stories about that as well. Not really crazy, but it is a memorable story and I don't regret giving him a lift. Picked a guy up one morning after coming back from a party in Northern California. He's very happy I stopped and said thank you, but hey, can you hold on a sec, I need to grab this dead deer. Oh crap, here we go. I thought for sure he was going to put it in the back. Turns out he just wanted to move it off the side of the road so his nieces didn't see it on the way to school from the bus. Oh dear. I picked up a hitchhiker from the motorway on ramp. He hopped in, said hello, asked where he wanted to go, and weirdly enough it was my destination. He asked if he could take his socks off. Cool man, no worries. I noticed he had many mobile phones on him. All were locked. He looked at me and told me I was handsome. Oh, I noticed he was heavily bandaged. Oh, I asked where he came from. Turns out he just walked out of the secure ward at the hospital. U-hop. For reasons unknown, he rang the police. I took the phone off him and they went, oh, it's Dave. We know Dave. Could you ask him if he is feeling violent today, U-hop? Dave wasn't feeling violent today, but he didn't want to get out of my van until he was far away. I pretended that I needed to pick a parcel up near the local hospital, dumped the van outside and locked the doors from outside. Trade van, secure locks. Dave chilled in the van, twiddling the knobs. I waved at him from outside. Dave didn't pay much attention, and that's why an ambulance and the police were bribing a schizophrenic escapee from a secure mental ward out of my van. Cheers, Dave. I hitchhiked from Northern California to Seattle once when I was 18. I didn't regret any of it. Some middle-aged woman picked me up in a Ferrari and drove me all the way from Medford to Salem and paid to get me a nice hotel room for the night, then additionally gave me an extra $200 to help me on my way back home. And I didn't even have to prostitute myself to her. She was just that cool. I was feeling nauseous because I had a stomach bug. So I went to a nearby gas station late at night when I knew not a whole lot of people would be there, so I could get some ginger ale and Gatorade. Some random guy just gets in my car with me and asks me to take him home, and I was feeling so ill I just didn't feel like protesting. So I took him home. On the way out, he opens up my center console and steals a watch and a pair of sunglasses that I kept in there. I didn't notice until I got home. Hopefully he got your stomach bug. Yes. Preface. I was a 18-year-old female college student at the time. Once a homeless man in his 40s who looked a little like my dad asked me for some money and I said no without even checking and drove away. I felt so guilty for not checking that I flipped a U and gave the guy some change. He was so grateful that I'd turn around just to give him a couple bucks, but then asked for a ride to a plasma donation center so he could get some money, so I reluctantly agreed but maintained cheerful. He was being creepy and hitting on me and being totally inappropriate, but nothing super terrible or physical. Kept his hands to himself. Then he told me a really sad story that he let an addict teenager live with him because the kid had nowhere else to go, and basically sucked him dry to the point where they got evicted and now this dude's homeless. Well, we finally get to the plasma center, and he asks me for my number. I said no, but he wouldn't get out of the car unless I gave it to him. Getting a little nervous, I decided it wouldn't hurt because if it became inappropriate I could just block him. Over the course of a month I'd get so many calls with the saddest voicemails that made me want to cry every single time. He would just ask me why I'm not answering the phone and that he just found $20 and wanted to take me out for sandwiches. Or tell me I know you felt that connection we had when in reality I was just being nice. He'd tell me he's lonely and was really looking forward to talking to me, but I wouldn't answer. I felt so guilty for that month, but I knew it would be terribly stupid of me to hang out with a 50-year-old homeless man who hits on me inappropriately. I couldn't block the number because it kept coming from different payphones. It was really sad to listen to. All ladies need a blunder number. I used to give out a memorized number that was actually for Big Daddy's escort service in Detroit. Sadly, a quick Google search reveals no longer exists. Sadly. Find yourself a good one. Always like to think the disappointed dude would at least get a chuckle. I used to travel by car a lot for work. Didn't mind picking up the odd hitchhiker. Picked up a guy who broke down on highway. He grabbed his bag and a case of beer, with maybe half a dozen left. I agreed to take him to the next town, and politely decline his offer for a road pop. He had to before arriving at the next town. Departing town within a few miles, I get pulled over for speeding. So please step out of the car. My eyes follow his flashlight revealing the case of beer with empties beside it. What a butthead that guy is. I hate when people leave their garbage in my car. Not a hitchhiking story. Kinda. I went to the pumpkin patch with my mom, twin, and older brother when I was probably 5. I think my brother was dressed as a cowboy and my sister and I were fairies. My mom was so excited to take our pictures in our adorable costumes and accidentally locked her keys in the car. This was the mid-90s, so we had to walk to call someone. So we walked our way down of a somewhat busy road. My twin and I as fairies holding our mom's hand, and my brother in his cowboy hat leading the way. Some lady driving by saw us and pulled over to pick us up. She drove us all the way home. It was my first time in a minivan and it was pretty rad. Great experience. In a fairy costume and riding in a minivan. 10/10 would do it. Again. Yes, my regret took months to get over. Was driving home and saw someone I had dated long ago walking the street on a 115-degree day. I know he had made many bad decisions and gotten involved with drugs and eventually discharged from army. I pulled over and asked where he was going and he said the DMV, which was about 8 miles away and only a few blocks out of my way. He got in and by the smell he hasn't showered or washed his clothing in months. It being 115 outside I couldn't open windows so I beelined it to the DMV. He left and I immediately ran into a Walgreens to get Febreze. Nothing got the smell out. I rented an upholstery cleaner and still the smell remained. After 2 more attempts I had to take the seat out and have it steam cleaned by a company that specializes in restorations from murder scenes and accidents. That nice gesture ended up costing over $400. The smell was of death and bow. My husband refuses to ride in car before it was cleaned. I was thinking it would be a sentimental regret that brought back memories, but I finished reading the story laughing. No regrets really, but some good stories. I was going home one morning and was at a stoplight one time and a raggedy guy runs across the intersection waving at me. So I roll down the window and he says he just spent the night in jail and someone stole his bike overnight. I was going his way anyway so I'll let him in. When we got to his place he insisted on smoking me up to repay me. I wasn't too hard to convince. We went inside and his whole house was filled with model airplanes. Built, half built, broken. Every flat surface had an airplane on it and there were literally dozens hanging from the ceiling to the point I had to duck through them like the worst hippie bead curtain ever. I laughed and made some half-joke comment about how he must really like planes and he just gave me cold look that made it clear the planes were not up for discussion. The guy couldn't even find his pipe or lighter among all the planes though, so I had to get a piece from my car. His weed wasn't bad though. I was on my way to a football game after school when this kid from my English class wanted to get to the stadium too and needed a ride. He was pretty sketchy looking, but I remembered how once he let me borrow his notes in class and I decided I owed him one. Halfway out of the parking lot, though, he broke into a coughing fit so loud it covered up my rock and roll music which was playing at full blast. I asked him if he was okay. He said he was fine. Halfway through, he began coughing again, this time so hard that he began spitting up blood. I ended up having to take him to the ER. Turns out, he had whooping cough all along, and the next week I began having similar symptoms. Not seriously, but even mild interactions can be creepy when hitchhiking because you're pretty vulnerable. One time I hopped a train to a small town in South Carolina and had to hitch out. A dude stops for me and immediately starts asking if I have a gun. I don't, but I'm kinda spooked that he seems to be anticipating that kind of encounter. If it wasn't for the fact that I'd been stuck in bumfuck nowhere for 2 days, with below freezing nights I would have noped out right then. As it was he offered to drive me the 15 miles to the nearest interstate. What's the worst that can happen? He starts hitting on me hard. I'm a dude, if it matters, from the moment I get in the car, and grows increasingly pouty when I fail to live up to whatever fantasy he has. By the end of 10 minutes his hand is so far up my leg he's practically grabbing my dong, and he says, "I'm really disappointed in you." Usually hitchhikers have a good sex story to tell me at the very least. Seems kinda ungrateful. Sorry to disappoint, dude. I thanked him and skipped before he got even more keyed up. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.